Hello, everyone. Professor Sexton here, and this is our lecture on common sentence errors. This is the only grammar lesson that we'll have for the course. And the reason why I chose these topics other than other ones is because these are the ones that gives the most number of people issues. In all my years of teaching, these are the mistakes that I see constantly across the board, regardless of the institution, regardless of the level of the student, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. These are the typical grammar mistakes when it comes to sentences. So remember earlier, we already had a quiz or a lesson about the different sentence types. So these common sentence errors are also related to those sentence types. So let me bring up the document. And this document is in course document, so you can take a look at it yourself and look at it closely. So let's bring it up. All right, so common sentence errors. So we already talked about the sentence type and what an independent clause is and what makes a sentence. And we talked about like the different types of sentences, compound complex, and how once you start adding more clauses to sentences, even though they make them more sophisticated sentences, it also opens up the opportunity for more mistakes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over what the types of mistakes are and how to correct them. So the three most common sentence level issues are comma splices, run-ons, which are sometimes called fused sentences, and fragments. What a comma splice is when two independent clauses, and remember that's on that earlier document, and you've already taken a quiz on that. When two independent clauses are joined with just a comma, that's incorrect. So here's an example. The example is the cafeteria food has improved, comma, the school privatized the operation. The comma here should not be used because you cannot use a comma to separate two independent clauses. They need to be separated. There are four ways to correct a comma splice. The easiest thing to do is to make them two separate sentences. So change the comma to a period and capitalize the next word. That's the easiest thing to do. The other thing is if there's a close relationship between the two sentences, you can use a semicolon. A semicolon is that it has the period at the top and then a comma. Be careful with the use of semicolons, so don't overuse these. You only want to use them if the two sentences are closely related to each other. If not, you want to use another method. Another thing is that you can use a coordinating conjunction to connect them. And there are 7 coordinated conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. However, these coordinated conjunctions do not always mean the same thing. So make sure that you're using the right one for the context of your sentence. I am going to load a document that explains the different meanings of the coordinating conjunctions in course documents. But if you were going to do that, what you would do is the cafeteria food has improved, leave the comma, and add the appropriate coordinated conjunction. For the school privatized the operation. That for shows a cause and effect relationship. There's a grammatical rule that you need to be aware of here, a punctuation rule. When you connect two sentences with a coordinating conjunction, you need a comma before the coordinating conjunction. It's not a major punctuation rule, but it's one that you should know and one that you should use. The last way to correct a comma splice is to change one of the sentences to a dependent clause, and then you make a complex compound sentence. And once again, those was on the sentence types. So what you can do here is you can write, the cafeteria food has improved since the school privatized the operation. Let me just give you another punctuation rule here. If the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, you don't need a comma between them. So notice that there's no comma there. However, if the dependent clause comes first, then you do need a comma. So if you did this, since the school privatized its operation, comma, the cafeteria food has improved. Once again, that's one of those minor punctuation rules. It's not major. Most people will overlook it and not even comment on it because what it doesn't detract from the context of the sentence. You can still understand what the sentence is about. Grammatical issues become a problem when they interfere with conveying your meaning and makes it unclear. Then it's an issue. So that's the comma splice. A run-on sentence is very similar to a comma splice. The only difference is with a run-on or sometimes a fused sentence, there's no punctuation mark between the two sentences. So I'm giving you the same one that I used in the other example, but you have here, the cafeteria food has improved, the school privatized the operation. Those are two complete sentences run together. A run-on sentence is a more serious grammatical mistake than a comma splice because at least a comma splice acknowledges the fact that these are two separate sentences. But when you run two sentences together, what it does is it creates confusion for the reader because the reader is going to read this as if it's one complete sentence. And when the reader gets to that second part, the reader is going to have to stop and figure out, okay, what's going on here? And if the reader has to do that, what it does is it interferes with you conveying your message. And then therefore your essay is not clear. So this is a run-on sentence. You correct a run-on sentence the same way you correct a comma splice. You make it two sentences, you add a comma in a coordinated conjunction, you use a semicolon, or you make one a dependent clause. So you correct a run-on and a comma splice the same way. The thing that you got to remember though, a lot of times with a run-on, what people do in order to correct a run-on, they stick a comma between the two. That's wrong because if you do that, you're just creating another mistake. That becomes a comma splice. The last sentence mistake is a sentence fragment. What a fragment is a group of words that do not express a complete thought. Now, it may have both the subject and a verb, but it is a group of words that cannot stand by itself. Some of the most common ones are ones that begin with which or for example, and usually in those cases, those are fragments that could be connected to either the sentence before or the sentence afterwards. So let me give you two examples. Like for instance, this one. For example, my mother's best friend. That's not a sentence. It doesn't have a verb and it doesn't tell me anything. Think about it this way. If someone walked into a room and told you, for example, my mother's best friend, and then walked out, you would be like, what? So it's not complete, it's a fragment. Another one is this prepositional phrase, behind the baseball field. Once again, it's not a complete sentence. It doesn't convey anything. The other ones are when you have a dependent clause, like for instance, this one, even though I exercised all summer. It's not complete. It has a subject and it has a verb, but that even though changes to a dependent clause, which means that it cannot stand by itself. It's the same instance with since my sister left to start college after we moved to California. It's not a complete sentence. To correct a fragment, there are numerous ways that you can do this. You can simply provide the missing subject and or verb, or you can change the dependent clause to an independent clause. Or a lot of times, you can connect the fragment to the sentence before it or sentence afterward to make it a complete thought. I've given you possible corrections above to some of the examples above, so just be aware of that. I mean, here's the best thing that I can tell you about finding comma splices, run-on sentences, and fragments. After you have written your paper, let it sit for a moment and then go back and reread your paper. But reread it carefully, paying attention to where you put your punctuation marks. Stop after a sentence and ask yourself, is that a complete thought in itself? And I think the best technique actually is reading your papers aloud. I know sometimes you might be in a situation where it may be difficult. I know right now we're not working in libraries, but when we return to that, if you're in the library, to read your paper out loud while other people are there will prove difficult. Or if you're working at a coffee shop or something like that, you may not be able to do that. But if you can, it is usually the best thing. And also, keep in mind, not all people will have these mistakes. What I've done, or what I am doing in the first papers that I'm grading, I'm marking like the first or two instances of them, but then I'm not marking them after that, because I don't feel me correcting your mistakes doesn't help you. What helps you is me identifying the mistakes, telling you how to correct them, and then you doing that. There are two quizzes on common splices, sentence fragments, and run-ons. One quiz is multiple choice, and it asks you to simply identify what type of mistake it is. You can take that one twice. The second one is asking you to correct the mistake. And keep in mind, like for common splices, run-ons, and fragments, there are numerous ways to correct them. So I don't care what method you use to correct the mistake, just as long as you correct the mistake. So those are your two quizzes on this subject. Keep in mind that that document that I just went over is in course documents. So if you want to take a look at it, it is there. And you may also want to review sentence types as well. All right, everyone. Hope you're doing well, and I'll see you Friday. Bye.